Hi crafters! Today I'm very excited to share a new project with you. We are going to create a book box inspired by Beauty and the Beast. It is both a decorative art piece and a functional object, and it can become a beautiful keepsake for Valentine's Day. If you love fairy tales, old books, and handmade creations with a story, this project is for you. For this project you will need a large plank of cardboard, some masking tape, paper mache clay, burlap cord, a piece of blister plastic, a long with paint and basic crafting tools. I want this book to look old and aged like it came from the Beast's library, so I'm going to work on creating a faded leather effect. Since this book is also a box, you will be able to use it to keep anything precious inside, such as jewelry, pictures, letters, memorabilia, or anything you like that fits. For now, let's start by tracing everything. First, I begin by creating the bottom of the box. I cut a large band of cardboard about 9.5 inches long and 17 inches high. Then I trace two 6-inch rectangles attached to it, and finally another 2.5-inch rectangle on the other end. At the top of the cardboard, I trace a 1-inch band, and at the bottom, I trace a 2.5-inch band. I create two curved shapes at the top of the smaller rectangle. These curves fit between the top of the cardboard and the line I traced. Since my book will have a rounded spine, these curved shapes will become the two ends of the binder. I cut out the cardboard, removing the extra length at the top between the two curved edges. With a cutter, I gently score the bottom line of the shorter sides and the vertical lines of the longer sides. I make sure not to cut all the way through because these lines will allow the cardboard to bend. I also cut the horizontal lines at each end of the shorter sides. These parts will fall inside the box and be enclosed by the outer walls. Once I have folded all the sides to form the bottom of the box, I tape everything with masking tape to fix the shape. Then I start working on the spine and the cover. I take a piece of cardboard that is about 1 inch taller than the box and 9.5 inches long. I roll about 3 inches of one end to break the fibers. This helps the cardboard curve smoothly. I make sure it fits perfectly around the back of the box where the curved edges are. The rest of the cardboard stays flat to cover the front of the box. I tape this piece to the bottom of the box, making sure to leave about half an inch of extra length all around. This mimics a real book cover, which is usually slightly larger than the pages inside. Then I cut a smaller rectangle the same size as the bottom of the box. In my case, it is 6 by 12 inches. I will later glue it inside the top cover to reinforce it. I also reinforce the inner sides of the box by cutting similar cardboard shapes. Next, I trace a rose in the middle of the top cover and cut it out. Before gluing the reinforcement piece underneath, I keep the rose cut out aside because I will reuse it later. I glue the reinforced rectangle under the cover with a glue gun. Now, I wrap the entire structure in craft paper, just like wrapping a gift. I make sure the paper is large enough to go all the way around the book. I cut small slits where the paper needs to fall so it doesn't bubble. Wrinkles are completely fine because they help recreate the texture of old leather, which is never perfectly smooth. The spine of old books was usually reinforced with thick cords that held the pages together. These cords created raised lines and made the books much stronger than modern glued bindings. I also find these spines much more aesthetic. To recreate this look, I bundle pieces of burlap cord in groups of 2 and glue them at regular intervals along the spine. Then I cover them with additional strips of craft paper and glue. You can see that I placed the rose cutout back over the opening where it used to be, but I didn't glue it yet. I will do that later after painting. I trace a glass bell around it and then add decorative elements inspired by medieval illuminated books. I draw further leaves, vines, and organic shapes inspired by the Beast Castle. I cover all these patterns with paper mache clay, which will dry on its own and create an embossed leather effect. This step takes time and patience. If you don't have paper mache clay, you can easily make some at home. I have a recipe on my channel that appears at the top of the screen. I always use it because it's cheaper, works very well, and it allows me to make just the amount I need. Once all the patterns, including the glass bell, are covered, I let everything dry for one full day. The next day, I sand the rough edges to smooth them. I try to be very careful not to damage the cardboard underneath. I will put a link to the sanding tools I use in the description. Now it's time to paint. I want a crimson color that looks slightly aged. I start with a red satin base. On top of that, I add touches of caramel, red ochre, and even a few drops of cocoa brown. Several layers of this mix are needed to cover the entire piece evenly. I paint the inside as well, but I leave the inner walls of the box unpainted because they represent the pages and will be painted in a different color. I use a copper marker to highlight all the raised patterns. For the pages, I choose gold paint and apply it all around the inner walls of the box. It doesn't show very well on camera, but in real life the texture really looks like aged leather. Now I go back to the rose cutout and start painting it. At first I considered painting it entirely gold, but then I decided to give it a more realistic look. I paint the stem and leaves in green and the petals in red. I go over the green paint with a green satin marker to trace the veins of the leaves and the contour of the stem. I draw the petals with a pink satin marker. It looks a bit too flashy once I place it on the cover, so I decide to darken the stem with a darker green and use a crimson color on the petals. I'm not sure if it was a good idea, but it felt like it needed more contrast. In the end, I reapply a bit of lighter green over the darker areas to soften everything, and I'm quite satisfied with the result. Now I move on to the inside of the box. I want to hide the craft paper seams that are still visible even after painting. I decide to use red glitter foam for a magical effect. I glue one large piece inside the box and continue it inside the cover as well. Then I trim it to the dimensions of the book. I really like how it looks. I then hot glue the rose onto the cover so it appears raised. To close the box, I cut a small cardboard strip that I placed between the pages and the inside of the cover. In Disney's adaptation of Beauty and the Beast, Pergel is mostly remembered for a yellow dress, so I wanted to add a touch of yellow to this book. I wrap the cardboard strip in yellow fabric, glue it and sew it, then I fix it to the cover with a staple gun. I add a small piece of velcro to the middle of the external wall of the box, which represents the pages, and I staple the other part of the velcro to the fabric tongue. Of course, the staples don't look very nice, so I sew another piece of yellow fabric over them to hide everything. I draw brown lines all around the gold painted walls to mimic the edges of real book pages. I make sure to add more shading under the spine where shadows would naturally fall. I'm not sure if it was a good idea, but I add a red satin band over the yellow fabric and a small felt heart in the middle. It might be a bit much, but I like it. I feel that the flower still needs more contrast, so I add a piece of red gauze over the red part of the flower and cover the leaves with green fabric. Originally I wanted to create a raised transparent piece over the flower to simulate a real glass bell, but I didn't know how I would manage to achieve that effect, so I put the idea aside. Now I feel like the piece is missing something, so I decide to try it. I use a piece of blister plastic cut slightly larger than the glass bell shape. I bend it and use a glue gun to give it a circular dome shape. Since the top and bottom are open, I need something to close them. I decide to use paper mache clay for this. It's not going to look perfectly clean, but it gives me enough flexibility to hold the shape in place. Paper mache clay doesn't stick very well to smooth surfaces like plastic or glass, so I apply glue first. Another option would have been to create a top and bottom in cardboard and cover them with craft paper, but since everything is already painted, I think clay is the better solution at this stage. If you have trouble creating the base using only clay, you can use aluminum foil as a structure, but you will need to cover it with clay because part of it will be visible inside the bell. I try to make the edges as clean as possible and then I let everything dry overnight. We are the next day and I think it looks pretty good, so I paint this new addition with my copper satin marker. And voila, my Beauty and the Beast inspired book box is complete. I really hope you like this project and that it inspires you to create something similar for Valentine's Day. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to see more projects like this, and I hope to see you in my next video. Happy crafting!